Welcome, everyone, to the No Weight Loss Required podcast. I am excited to introduce Amanda Beck, who is the creator of The Fat Dispatch, which is a Substack newsletter. She's also the author of 2 different books, and I'll let Amanda talk about that. She has the most amazing part, Ozempic Monday, and that's a section of her blog post. And that's one of the reasons why I became a paid subscriber and why I invited her on this podcast, because I feel like the conversation around GLP-1s requires some nuance understanding, and it is so essential that we get lived experience. So with that, Amanda, please tell me a little bit more about yourself and, again, why? What was the motivation behind the Fat Dispatch?
So thank you so much for having me. I really love the work that you do on Substack as well. I am Amanda Martinez Beck. There are lots of Amanda Becks out there. So I keep that Martinez sandwiched in there so you can find me. That is my Cuban heritage coming through. So I'm a white Latina. I live in a fat body. I have a master's degree in Spanish, and I've done a lot of doctoral work in leadership, but I recently quit that program in part to focus on my writing and to really dive into where I feel called to the next step of my life. And part of that is the Fat Dispatch. So in, I guess, November 2024, I had a dream. And in that dream, I was holding a book that I had written called The Weight Loss Gospel. I woke up from that dream and wrote out a 10-chapter outline for a book about how weight loss and diet culture is a religion in American culture. And I am a religious person, but this book is not necessarily for religious people. It's just for people to think about how has religious language and identity been woven in to the diet culture that's so pervasive. And one of my points is that if you aren't aware of diet culture, you're probably its disciple. So the Fat Dispatch, I rebranded my newsletter and launched it in November to explore those questions. I say that it's love and happiness through a fat liberation lens. And so I was writing about fatness, and my purpose in writing is to explore how fatness affects our lives. And it's not just for fat people. I have a lot of people who subscribe who are in average to small bodies. It's for everyone because fatness affects us all. I like to say that nobody is free to be fat until we're all free to be fat. Because fatness is this huge fear in our culture. And that really affects people's everyday lives. So I'm trying to reach everyone. It's a big audience. And I want to address the reality that it's okay to be fat. Even that it's good to be fat? Question mark. If people can entertain the idea that bodies are not meant to be just one small size.
Yeah. Kind of playing off that idea of it's good to be fat, question mark. I think it's good to be. So kind of really pulling back and say we get to exist. And if our bodies are fat bodies, we get to exist. If our bodies aren't fat bodies, we get to exist. And when you turn around and you say your body only gets to exist if it looks X or it weighs Y, then you don't get to be. And being is really turn around. It's the first step of othering. So if I don't get to be who I am, then I am now othered. And so that's really kind of this, it's oppression.
It is oppression. I love that you bring it back to being. A dietitian that I had many moons ago said this to me, and it wasn't her original idea, but she was the first one to speak it to me. She said, what if it's not letting yourself go? What if it's letting yourself be? And that really impacted me because we hear so frequently that fat people have let themselves go. And I know for me, the journey to embracing my body as it is today has involved letting myself be, like you're saying.
And that's going to get back into the acceptance piece. And when we're trying to accept ourselves, warts and all, it's really hard when everyone is very afraid of, the wart. Everyone's turning around saying like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine, like, oh, what would it be like to have that issue? The truth is that there are fat bodies. Like there's always been fat bodies. So this all of a sudden villaination, how we vilify, how we moralize, like you said, it's they've let themselves go. Now we're starting to kind of jump into this whole myth that people who have fat bodies aren't taking care of themselves.
Right. And I write about this on the Fat Dispatch. I wrote a parable called Sinners in the Hands of a Skinny God, a play off of Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. But this idea, this myth that our original bodies were thin and svelte and there was no excess body fat. And we're trying to get back to that imagined paradise so that we have some sort of transcendent experience, which is free from pain. And I just realized as I have been kind of entering this world as diet culture as religion, that there is a better way. And for me, it deals with what is the purpose of our bodies. And a lot of people in diet culture believe the purpose of our bodies is to function as well as possible without pain. But that means that any body that has pain or disability is described as a bad body. And it leaves us out. I am both fat and disabled. I use the word fat as a neutral descriptor of my body. It's not an epithet. But I am disabled as well. I have difficulty walking, not because I'm fat, but because that's how my body has handled things that has happened to it. And for me, the purpose of my body is relationship, not thinness. Relationship with myself, with others, and for me, with the divine. Learning to interact in relationship with these three dynamics, self, others, the divine, has revolutionized how I see my body. It's not just a vessel. A lot of people like to say, oh, our body helps us do things. But like you said earlier, our body helps us just to be. This very existence is our bodies and ourselves.
Beautiful. I have to laugh. I also have a hard time walking, and I was able to walk 2 miles this weekend,
Oh,
which was
wow.
like so I have back injury. I have a chronic, I'm dealing with chronic pain, and it's just so interesting when, I've had multiple surgery and people would say things like, "Oh, your knees are bad, but you're not fat." And I'm like, people have bad knees all the time. Like, why do you think only fat people have bad knees? You can't walk, you're not fat. And I'm like, I have a chronic, pain issue. Like I can't, my back is very not right. And
Yeah.
people are always so surprised, like, well, why? Like, because bodies, the body itself, by itself is always going to be fraught with problems. That bodies are
Mhm.
they have pain as part of life. And,
Right.
it isn't because you did anything. It isn't because you didn't do something. So again, we're getting into some of the really, really big myths. I also want to pull out something you said about the divine and really talking about the grace. And I write a lot about giving ourselves grace. And I love to say it as space and grace. Diet culture puts us on a treadmill, go, 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 do more, 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 fast, 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 try harder, harder, harder. And we lack the space when we're on that diet culture treadmill. Our life gets very, very small and
Yeah.
it gets very fast. And we also lack grace, meaning I'm not a perfect person. I'm not ashamed of saying that. I'm human and I make mistakes and I do things that are harmful. Like, I always kind of joke about, like, I get to be an asshole. I don't want to be an asshole, but I'm sure there's many people that have met me and thought, oh, she's an asshole. You know what I mean? And so I have to give myself grace that, like, that possibility exists, and it's probably happened. Like, it's not my intention, but it happens. My intention is to, nourish my body, but it doesn't always happen. I'm not a bad person because I
Mhm.
didn't nourish my body. It just happened. And again, when we turn around and say, like, oh my gosh, you're not living your intention, you're not perfectly in alignment. No one's perfectly in alignment.
I think this is where I can have an answer to that question I offered at the beginning. Fat is good, because I think fatness is a sign and a symbol of, in our culture, is a very negative symbol. But I think when you're liberated to see the bodies as all sizes, fatness is this lush abundance where we get to enjoy and rest instead of this on the treadmill like you're talking about. So I like to see my fat body as a sign of counter the culture in a great way, to embrace that.
Absolutely. And I do think rest, that's one of the great slogans that are out there is, rest is a form of resistance. And it's very, very true. And taking up space is a form of resistance. We're all trying to shrink and, stick ourselves into these small little vessels. I have lovely little quotes that my clients share. She said, diet culture puts you in a box.
Wow. A box that's a certain size, it definitely puts you in a box. And
Absolutely.
I think any idea can become a box.
Any label.
Any label, even fat acceptance. And I say that because I have been on Ozempic for 4 years. And for a couple of years, I was really afraid to talk about being on Ozempic because I didn't want people to think I had betrayed body liberation, right? And so I think our expectations can become a box, and exploring nuance outside of those strictures is really important. And I was writing for the Fat Dispatch a piece called Ozempic and Me, where I shared, hey, I'm on Ozempic and I'm still in a fat body and I'm not trying to lose weight. And it really hit a nerve with people who hadn't really heard that side of the story, because we're trained to think, oh, GLP-1s, which is the class of drug that Ozempic falls in, are for weight loss now instead of diabetes management. And my post got like 10,000 views in a week, which for me is incredible. And I think people are really hungry for that nuance. And so that's what I really try to bring with my lived experience, both as a fat person and as a fat activist. How can we have conversations that are very black and white in our culture? How can we look at the shades of gray and add color?
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And I really appreciate you talking about diabetes. So, No Weight Loss Required is kind of my attempt to help people with diabetes recognize, like, you don't have to lose weight if you are trying to prevent or manage diabetes. And definitely uphill battle. I know how salmon feel. Swim harder. And I'm quite confident, because I've got lots of gray hairs, that when I get to the spawning ground where people actually are like, yes, that's a great idea, I'll probably just die because I'm old. uh, but I'm swimming hard and you're swimming with me, and I appreciate that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So kind of just really talking a little bit more, what is it about when we talk about fat and diabetes? If you could speak a little bit about that. We're dealing with intersectional stigma. And you mentioned a couple other intersections. So healthism in addition to that, and we have ableism that is also coming in. And so you're talking about, I'm a body that's disabled, I have a hard time walking. And then we also have the stigma of diabetes. We have the stigma of illness. Can they ever be healthy because they have a chronic illness? But then we also get into the stigma of diabetes and the stigma of weight. And so that intersectionality to me is the gray. And if you have words, wisdom, ideas, thoughts, hope, inspiration, or anything, please share about that intersectionality.
So I like to think about this phrase that I've heard. There is no disease or condition exclusive to fat bodies. There are thin people who have diabetes, any type. There are thin people who have heart attacks. There are thin people who can't walk. There is nothing exclusive to fatness save fatness itself. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, all these things that we assume about a fat body. All of those things can happen in a thin body too. And so when I'm in a healthcare setting, which is really where I experience the suppression most, is this anti-fatness, anti-chronic illness. Diabetes is seen as such a punishment, is seen as punitive rather than just existential. I've had a therapist tell me, one who works with eating disorders, like, you can't give yourself diabetes. And so when I could recognize that diabetes was not my fault, I could really kind of peel off the shame layers of, if only I hadn't done X, if only I had done Y, and just sit with my fat body that has type 2 diabetes. And grieve, my friend Bree Campos, a lot of people know her body image with Bree. She talks about sitting in the suck and grieving and giving space for grief, the body that we thought we would have versus the body that we actually have. And I think when a person like me in a fat body with diabetes can grieve that, and we can eventually move towards acceptance, kind of like the stages of grief, move towards acceptance and then a fuller life on the other side of that grief. So that is how I've come to accept I'm fat and I have diabetes.
Beautiful, beautiful. I really appreciate you bringing in this idea of grief. So, in an article that I wrote about, and it's talking about how grief and diet culture intersect. When we talk about acceptance, acceptance is a complex emotion, and I've broken it down into 5G words to help people understand it. So, the first one is grumpy. We're grumpy, first G word. And the second one is guilt. And the third is grief. So when we're trying to come to acceptance, we have to recognize we're grumpy. We often then move to guilt, and then we go to grief. And this is where diet culture steps in. Diet culture says we can fix grief. And so you go back to grumpy, and then you feel guilty, and then you go back to grief, and you're stuck in this cycle. Okay.
Wow.
Because on the other side of grief, when we can sit in the suck, thank you, Bree, when we can be, then we can go to glee, a weight lifted, and then we can get to gratitude, which is your grace again. So going back and turn around and saying, like, I have a body, I love my body as my body is, as my body changes, as my body functions and allows me to live my life. This is the body that I have. It is not, it's always it's a dynamic space, but I'm accepting and I'm nourishing and I'm caring for the body that I have. That's grace to me. Like that's the definition of acceptance of grace. And so when we look at acceptance, we really recognize diet culture is trying to keep us from acceptance.
Absolutely, because capitalism undergirds diet culture, and that there's this idea that we are machines. And that we see it in calories in, calories out mantra that I say is a religious mantra. Like people recite that all the time. And it's just not true. Our bodies are complex and process energy differently per person. But capitalism has us thinking that if you put something in, you should get something out that's equal, or if you put in so many exercises, you should get out so much weight loss. And I think personalism is an idea from the early 20th century that focuses instead on what does the person need rather than what does the capitalist construct need. And I see it as really freeing when we can have a relationship with ourselves that treats ourselves as if we were another person. It helps me give myself grace if I think, What would I say to my daughter? What would I say to my friend? And speaking those words back to myself and really building that relationship of trust with myself so that I silence the voice of that internal critic and I start hearing the voice of affirmation. I am enough. I am not too much. My purpose is relationship, not thinness.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful. So much you said there. Um, and I just love it. It's very, very juicy. And one of the things that you said that I kind of want to pull back to, as you were talking about calories in, calories out, and I had a light bulb moment because I grew up in my brother and sister and parents identified as fat, and I was not fat. And fast forward, we found out that I had hyperthyroidism. And so I am the definition of how calories in, calories out don't work. I was like, oh, and it wasn't until I was, because I couldn't have kids because my thyroid was messed up. And so I went to, fertility clinic and, they're like, you do know you have hyperthyroidism. I'm like, no, I never got the memo.
Oh my goodness.
And of course, when for a lot of people that have this condition, you have this, terrible GI problem. So oh, you've got irritable bowel. No, I have a thyroid dysfunction. And once I got diagnosed with that, it was like, I so understand how calories in, calories out don't work. And our thyroid is, regulating so much. And these people who are turning around and saying like, oh, it's calories in, calories out. And I remember like my sister would eat so much less than me. And she would be like, how can you eat so much? And I'm like, I don't know, must be lucky. I don't know. It's because I'm a dietitian. When in fact, it had nothing to do with anything that I was
Mhm.
eating. It was just that at the time, I don't have a thyroid anymore. But it was just like, wow, calories in, calories out. That's like it's just so false at so many levels. And I feel like everyone missed that class. We deleted that memo.
Yes. Well, it's interesting to think about you and your sister's conversations of how can you eat what you eat and live in that body, because we so associate eating with morality, and people who quote overindulge are portrayed as fat, and people that are not fat are never accused of overindulgence. But my friend Jay Nicole Morgan, in her book Fat and Faithful, Learning to Love Ourselves, Our Bodies, and Our Neighbors, I got that wrong, but it's something like that, Fat and Faithful. She says gluttony, which is what people talk about as like eating too much or drinking too much. Gluttony is actually consumption that harms our neighbor. And so I love her definition because it takes gluttony outside of how much I should eat, a morality question of how much I should eat, and says, how can I care for my neighbor? And that relationship piece of loving myself, loving others, loving the divine comes back in of, it's not that we have 7 people and 8 pieces of cake. Everyone's going to get a piece of cake. I'm not a glutton if I eat that 8th piece. But if we have 8 pieces of cake and 8 people, and I eat somebody else's piece of cake, maybe I'm a glutton then. That's where morality comes in with food. Like, does everybody have enough?
Yeah. And that ties right in with some of the kind of hallmarks of white supremacy culture, which is, again, we're only thinking about our needs and we're not thinking about the needs of other people. Drilling down a little bit more, tell us a little bit more about you. Tell us a little bit more about, why people might want to subscribe to the Fat Dispatch, kind of, and share a little bit more about the books that you wrote and a little bit more about how can people get to know you? And
So, um, the Fat Dispatch has been a bright light for me over the past 6 months because life is just hard. I have 4 kids and a wonderful supportive spouse, and yet life is hard. And so I've really loved getting to hear from readers and sharing my own experiences. And one of the things that came out of my post on Ozempic and me is this new every weekly post for paid subscribers called Nozempic Mondays. And it's for people who either don't want to take GLP-1s for weight loss or who are on GLP-1s for diabetes management, not for weight loss. There are a lot of programs out there that support people wanting to take GLP-1s for weight loss, but I really found there wasn't anything for people who either wanted to embrace their bodies just as they are and didn't need or didn't want GLP-1s to be pushed for weight loss. And so every Monday, I go through and I talk about a topic connected to GLP-1. This week, I'm talking about nutrition and GLP-1s because it's coming out now that we need to pay attention to nutrition when you've turned off your hunger cues, which is what a GLP-1 urges you to do, dulls hunger cues. So I talk about a topic and then I talk about the news that's happening around GLP-1s, whether it's the FDA ruling that compounding pharmacies can't make any more Ozempic, or whether it's Eli Lilly coming out with an oral semaglutide or semaglutide pill, just keeping your finger on the heartbeat of the GLP-1 movement. And I'm not anti-GLP-1. I take Ozempic. I'm anti-forced weight loss, which is so much of our culture. So if that's intriguing to you, then I would love to have you over at thefatdispatch.com. I'm also on Instagram as the Fat Dispatch, and but most of my activities are on thefatdispatch.com. And my 2 books. So I mentioned before that I am a religious person. I'm a Christian of many stripes. I call myself a Christian mutt because I've been Catholic, I've been Protestant, I've been all over the place. My first book is called Lovely: How I Learned to Embrace the Body God Gave Me. And it's a look at the phrase, all bodies are good bodies, and that idea of purpose, defining what is good from a theological position. I was Catholic when I wrote it, and so it's Catholic heavy, but I think it's still accessible for people no matter your religious experiences. But then my second book, More of You, The Fat Girl's Field Guide to the Modern World, is a much more practical handbook of how to do things like have conversations with your doctor about weight neutral care. How do you address anti-fatness in your life? The 4 levels of anti-fatness: the personal, the interpersonal, the communal, and the structural. How do you break free from the shame cycle? Just step-by-step instructions. It's based around 10 affirmations. One of them being all bodies are good bodies. From all bodies are good bodies to I deserve the right to compassionate and informed weight neutral healthcare. So they're not all like really cute little aphorisms like all bodies are good bodies, but 10 affirmations that you can incorporate into your life to reprogram your brain in the ways that diet culture and the church of diet culture has indoctrinated you.
I'm so excited to have this conversation about GLP-1s, not from a weight loss lens. And, I also think GLP-1s are a really good medication. My personal opinion on them as a diabetes educator, I've seen them help a lot of my clients. And I really hope we're going to be able to get them for our clients with type 1 and get the FDA to approve a lot of these medications. But really what we see with GLP-1s are, for many people, they're anti-inflammatory. And so they really reduce that stress response you talked about and inflammation. And I see a lot of people get benefit from them at much lower dose. Now, when I say benefit, meaning their joints don't hurt. They're like, oh, my blood sugars are more stable. My joints don't hurt. I feel better. Like, to me, that's great. You don't need to make yourself not hungry. You don't need to make yourself, sick for 3 days. You can get benefits. And I'm really curious to find out if the whole weight loss thing is going to go by the wayside, because it's protective against kidney disease and heart disease. And these are medications that, to me, if you're not taking them in these large doses, potentially could be, quite a helpful option for some people. And yet people are like, oh, if I take this drug, I have to lose weight. I'm like, says who? So who said that? Like, what? So that conversation isn't happening. And I'm just thrilled beyond words that you're having this conversation. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the handbook that you kind of talked about. How can we bring this idea of fat acceptance, of self-acceptance, and not even fat
Mhm.
acceptance, just self-acceptance? Because you did indicate, and I do want to go back to this, fat phobia is not restricted to fat bodies. So diet culture is not just for people who are dieting. Diet culture is the water we swim in, it's the air we
Mhm.
breathe in. It is one of many oppressive systems that we live in. And like you said, when we start looking at that, we start realizing it's not just personal, it's not just interpersonal, it's not just societal, it's systemic. These are
Mhm.
structures that are placed, and again, when we start kind of taking a step back and looking at it, we are untangling the knot of stigma. And when we talk about intersectional stigma, we're also talking about healthism, gender, weight, medication. I mean, medication costs, we haven't even touched into that,
That's true.
access, all these different things. And we just realize everyone's like, oh, I can fix it. And I'm like, you're untangling it. It's a knot, and
Mhm.
we're all trying to untangle it. And I love it because I kind of see this in the periphery. I see like Bob like pulls a thread out and goes, I fixed it. I'm like, well, happy for you, Bob, that you untangled your knot. Happy for you, Bob. The rest of us over here, our knot's a little bit bigger. And so just kind of giving some space and grace that we do get so fascinated by the people that have the one knot. And I'm just like, yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you again for your time. And I want to wrap it up at this point.